What is good, my ex-homies? It's your boy Jacob Gooden, and we're back another week in the Ex-Homeschoolers Club. Today, I'm so honored because I have a homeschool mom with us. Kim is joining us, and I'm so stoked to chat with her because she reached out about a couple different things, and we started having conversations around homeschool stories, homeschool alumni stories, and one of the things that I've noticed a lot is that homeschool parents and homeschool parent alumni kind of they get sometimes triggered by some of the criticisms that us homeschool alumni like give. And Kim was not that way. She was very like understanding and wanted to listen and understands that a lot of what we talk about has more to do with like creating kind of like a wish list of things that we wish were different when we were kids and how can we impact the future generations of homeschoolers. So we're going to get into some of that, but we're also going to hear Kim's story of being a homeschool mom. So Kim, welcome to the Ex-Homeschoolers Club. So happy to have you.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Let's kick things off with like your homeschool story. So like tell me a little bit about your family and why you chose to homeschool your kids and just a little bit about like how long you homeschooled, the curriculum you used. Give us a little like snapshot of that whole thing.
Well, my husband and I are both certified teachers. We met in college and we both taught in the classroom um, for a while. And then when we had kids, we always said, we could homeschool. Let's homeschool our kids. We never, anti public education. In fact, he's still a classroom teacher now. But as we looked for, how are we going to bring up our kids? Homeschooling was always sort of an option that we wanted to explore. And the why do you want to do why do you want to homeschool? Our biggest reasoning was because we felt like that would help create like a closeness within our family. Both of us grew up with siblings that we were not very close with. And so part of the goal of the way that we wanted to parent was to give our children each other in the end as friends. And so they're going to, lean on each other long after we're gone. And so that was really the main goal of what we were aiming to do. And so um, it kind of set us in a weird place though, because back when we were homeschooling, back back in the dark ages, people homeschooled and they kind of went into it like full in and said we're going to homeschool the whole way through. We're going to homeschool all of the kids, and ours was sort of more like a year by year. Let's evaluate how is this going. Are we on the right path, kind of a thing. And so I did a lot of research and using homeschool materials and trying to figure out, what our day would look like. It wouldn't look like a normal school day because I'd been in the classroom,
Right.
open the book, do this thing, and it just wasn't going to be like that. It's more like a one room schoolhouse style because we have three kids. And they were, all 2 years apart from each other. So there's sort of this sort of close knit, like if mama's going to read, you're all sitting down, we're going to read this together. But then they had activities that they would do kind of at their own levels too. And the little one would wander away when she got bored and go find toys and entertain herself, somewhere. But a lot of our goal was also to just enjoy childhood, not just, you know, facilitating the time that they would spend with each other, but in general, just getting the chance to play a lot more than kids are getting to do in school anymore. They're, here, hold this pencil, do this worksheet, let me grade you on it. And so we were trying to get away from that, kind of explore the possibilities. What do we get to do with our time and enjoy ourselves as a family?
So with that being said, then like what are some of those like extracurriculars or those like additional things that are outside of the classroom that you were like bringing in? Because like I know for me, my mom, we involved like museums was a big part of it, and then like as far as like whatever extracurriculars we were interested, like I was a dancer, so dance was a big part of that, and music was a big part of our lives and things like that. So what were those extracurricular things that you were like, okay, let's bring those in to our school environment?
My oldest daughter was into gymnastics. We took her, to try to do, just some, she was always moving and running, and enjoyed jumping on the trampoline and stuff. And we were like, okay, well, let's see how she likes gymnastics. And she like took to it like she belonged in the gym. And she ended up spending a good bit of time on competitive gymnastics as she went along too. So part of homeschooling was able to give her sort of that time and space to be able to devote to that. The younger ones, they were more, diverse. They couldn't figure, we tried them on t-ball and soccer. And my son said halfway through the soccer season, he's like, do I have to go practice? And I'm like, why? And he's like, because I am tired of running. He was never like really super aggressive, so he'd like chase the pack. He never got to really kick the ball. I'm like, I'd probably be tired of running, chasing back and forth with that
Yeah.
too. So, but they got to, try different things. But the thing that really we spent a good bit of time also doing was reading, a lot of reading. So a lot of our learning was literature based, and we found a homeschool co-op program that they did a period of history, and then they did literature that surrounded that, and then did fine arts that went along with that. So like when we were doing like medieval history, they would read books that were about that time. I think Pilgrim's Progress or whatever came up with some of that stuff. And then they did King Arthur and whatever, as a play, and artwork that, stained glass kind of, art that went along with the kind of art, music, history that kind of tied together all of that. And so we did that.
I love that because like that's it, what you're describing is very similar to like I also had a smaller homeschool co-op that was 3 or 4 families, and we would do what you're describing. We would pick a period of history, and we did have like a history textbook that went with it, but then we read literature and do activities around it, and we did some really cool stuff. And you're talking about like the stained glass stuff, and we would make like foam weapons that were medieval themed because a lot of us were guys. I think there was only like my sister and maybe one other girl, and so um, and then we'd beat each other with foam swords and stuff like that. The one week that we ended up missing, I found out later that all the guys had created torches and poured gasoline and wrapped this thing, and were walking around the front yard of this house carrying torches because they were gonna go like stone a witch or something like that. And it's so fun. They got in so much trouble, but I was so thankful I missed that week. But that was kind of the activity levels that my homeschool experience drew upon to some degree. I'm curious about like curriculum and choosing curriculum because you were a school teacher. You obviously you were in that world already. But when it comes to the homeschool curriculum, there is such a wide variety of stuff out there. And so, what did it like? How was it going through choosing stuff for your kids, and like how did that change over time? Like, was it just kind of a matter of figuring out like this is not working for this kid, so we're gonna switch to this thing, or like how was the curriculum choice situation?
The curriculum that I chose in the beginning was 5 in a row, and it's still, one that's kind of popular. They've revised it. So a lot of the books that they had were getting to be out of print and harder to find. But I liked sort of the philosophy of like offering kids sort of like bite-sized, you know, information and kind of repetition of things. I like that way of presenting the information. So, and it fit with sort of my, I didn't know at the time, but I have ADHD too. And so my resistance to too much routine, I wanted some, flexibility and following our interest and for myself as well. And so that sort of interest-based, project-based unit studies, things like that, were very much my style. And personality of how I could implement things too. Lots of creativity and hands-on, crafts and projects and things like that. I didn't want to sit and read this text and do these quizzes, and that just didn't appeal to me. I didn't like that as a classroom teacher, having to grade papers. So, and keep up on that. And so there was a good bit of those kind of like group projects that were hands-on that we did, and then there were materials that I had picked. I'd never really taught anybody how to read. There was, I think her name is Ruth Beachick. She has like about 3 R's, like little booklets that it broke down explanation wise of how the stages of reading work. Like it clicked with me in a way that I had never gotten even as an elementary education teacher. When I was in the classroom, I had kids that were like putting an extra ed on the word, looked it, stopped it, and I'm like, I don't know how to make them stop doing that. Why are they doing that? But move on in the next lesson in the book, and so trying to be able to remediate and catch them from the very beginning of how do you start teaching them how to read was kind of a new part for me. So I found this 100 Easy Lessons to Teach Your Child to Read. And I know we spent easily 400 days in it, crying and pulling our hair out and melting down and saying, never mind, we're going to take a break and tomorrow we'll start again. It was easy because it was scripted, but it was not easy. And especially since my daughter actually ended up having like sort of a dyslexia, visual
Right.
perception kind of learning issue. I like the idea that it taught us to, this shape says, you don't need to know the name of this letter is M in order to read it, but months down the road, she still one day could read it, one day couldn't read it, and I didn't know that I could change things up. I was always looking for what else can I like supplement in here. I understood like Ruth Beachick's like steps, and I'm like, okay, but where do I fit into where we're still practicing with decoding and blending, and we're stuck in this phase, so what more resources can I supplement with this, and then come back to this book and
Right.
try to move forward.
Right. Well, I'm curious because like I also grew up in a house with dyslexic people, and so like learning like P's and B's get flipped, and and like D's and Q, or I don't know. We would write it on our hand. We would Sharpie on our hand what it
Yes.
was, and it would flip, and you could do all the different things. And there was all these tricks that we ended up learning. And for me, I was not dyslexic, so reading. I went to grade school until I was in second grade, so I was already pretty well established in my reading by the time we were homeschooling. But my sister was not, and so my mom had to kind of. There was a lot of this kind of like trial and error, like what you're describing, of like kind of coming at it, and there'd be tears and be frustration and be like, okay, we're gonna stop for today, we'll come back, we'll try it again tomorrow, we'll try maybe a little bit of a different approach. So what was there anything at that time where you were starting to go, okay, something is like, we need to maybe go get my child evaluated, or we need to find a different curriculum, and like how was that kind of decision? Because I think that's sometimes hard for parents to like acknowledge, is like, my kid's not getting it, why am I a dumb teacher, or is there actually something that needs to be taught differently?
So I did know that the public school would do like learning disability screening tests and stuff. So I went and got in, and they did the screening tests. But they also they measure the way the schools measure. They measure your like IQ, and then your academic performance, and there has to be like a discrepancy for how much higher your academics has to be much lower than your actual IQ achievement, and she came in opposite. That she was outperforming. What so yay homeschooling that you're I'm like, no, you don't understand, we're frustrated.
Right.
And so, but I did find another program at one of the homeschool, you know Expo kind of like vendor fair kind of things, and it was the NILD, National Institute of Learning Disabilities, and they took her scores and were able to look and say, well, this one has a score of 5, and this category has a 12. This is the
Right.
discrepancy of where things are, and um, they do physical therapy that crosses the midline, and so we did that, and
That's like a big part, I think, of like many people choose to homeschool their kids because their kid has like a learning disability or just learns differently, right? And so they're like, oh, well, I could do it
Right.
better at home. But then they don't always take the time to actually then like find the things that actually work for that student or get them tested or evaluated or anything like that. And that's a huge miss in my book, but that comes from the fact that in my family, once the evaluations happen, once the diagnosis comes, like all those types of things, it opens up a whole new world in which it's like, now I understand what's going on in my brain and I can implement new strategies to do that. And so that's kind of what I'm hearing you say.
But the school was categorizing her and saying, yay, that you can work with her one on one, and it wasn't offering any kind of support resources. And so I think there's a lot of people that are still kind of in that boat that the school can't make enough accommodations for what else the child needs. I say everybody's a part time homeschooler then because there's 180 days of school and 365 days of learning. So I find a lot of parents are now looking for some sort of supplemental resources to help, fill in where you're the one that's going to lay awake at night worrying,
Absolutely.
if the lunch, if they have lunch money and,
Yeah.
do they need a math tutor and stuff like that.
Yeah,
So,
no,
yeah.
it's I think a lot of people think like public school or private school, they view it as this like, well, I send my kid off and then that's it. That's like their learning experience. It's like, no, that's not really how it happens. Like learning is, especially when you're young, it's like it's a 24/7 event. Or maybe not 24/7 because there's 8 hours of sleep in there, hopefully. Um,
Hmm.
but it is a
Right.
16 hours of learning a day. And so yeah, mom and dad need to be involved in that, right? Parents need to be involved, kids need to be involved, teachers, mentors, all those types of things are involved in educating a kid. And so yeah, very much to your point, it's like
Yep.
even though you send them to school, they're still going to need to learn stuff. You still got to be able to teach them when they're at home.
Right. It's a partnership and
Exactly.
collaboration that
100%.
we've lost sight of that
Yes.
in this society. It's us versus them and who gets to control the kids and
Yeah.
stuff. And so,
Yeah. I'm curious, did you homeschool all of your kids all the way through, or did they end up going to public school?
so I homeschooled the older two all the way through. And then the youngest one, she was having some other learning issues, and it was becoming like I just felt like I was wrestling a lion with her, and so something else was going on with her, and we didn't have the tools. I wasn't finding the tools and resources that could help support whatever was going on with her, and so we decided to put her back into public school and let sort of outsource the education and say, okay, you guys try to help figure out what's going on with her educationally, and we're going to focus on being parents and kind of because homeschooling has a way of kind of magnifying all of your parenting woes and everything gets tangled together, and uh, it can become a combative. The point was to have a good relationship with our kids, and we were kind of getting in a counterproductive way where it was just this battle of wills with her all the time. And then it would take a lot of my time and energy to focus on her, and I'd tell the other two go do some math, and they'd come back, okay, then a week later let's sit down and look at what you've done. And they're like, I'm like, okay, tell me what you were doing here. And they're like, I don't know. I'm like, well, it's wrong, we have to do it all over again. So like I wasn't doing good at any of it. And so it was like, where do we refocus our energy and try to, you know, do what's best for each child.
Yeah, you brought up a good point in there. You said something along the lines of, and I've had a couple guests talk about this, is like the idea of like my parent, the line between my parent being my parent and them being my teacher gets really blurry when you homeschool. And because homeschooling, as many people know, is not just a like 9:30 in the morning to 4 o'clock in the afternoon event and then we're done. Like it tends to
Right.
bleed over into many hours of the day. And I was a kid who did school at 10 o'clock sometime, 10 p.m., because I was just, that's what my brain was firing. um but that line becomes very blurry. And like, what was that hard for, like, you talked about needing to send your daughter off back to school because it was like, okay, that we need to kind of just be parents, we need to take the teacher hat off a little bit. And so I'm wondering, like, even now as your kids are older, have you found that like being able to now just like be a parent, like what, how has that transition, or what are your thoughts on that, like parents also wearing the teacher hat and the lines getting blurry. Like, do you have any thoughts around that experience and kind of navigating that?
Well, like I said, homeschooling has a way of taking all your parenting woes and kind of
Right.
magnifying it. Like this whole weight of responsibility weighs very heavy. And the vast majority of people that I talk to, that's the way they're coming in with this weight of responsibility, and it's like if they never cooked before, like what do I cook for dinner tonight? Well, we have to navigate this thing, but they don't want to screw it up, and so trying to find what's the best curriculum and how do I do this? And but more and more people are coming in now that are like doing it temporarily, which is how I was looking at it from year to year. That okay, so we're going to put you in school for a little while, maybe think we figure out what's going on, then if you want to come back and we find some other materials. There's online schools that you can do starting to at that point in time. I'm like, because she still struggled in school. And so watching your child like struggle and like trying to figure out, how do we get you through this? Um, it's hard. But being able to just kind of separate some of that out and say, okay, we're on the same side trying to work through this problem with you, instead of me being the one saying, this is what the work is you have to do, and her going, no, that's stupid, I'm not doing that.
Right.
um,
Something that I realized is like even the times that I was really combative with my mom or really like, exactly what you're describing of like feeling like she wasn't on my team because she's pushing this curriculum that I'm not understanding and it's not clicking to her, you know, now I can look back on a lot of that type of stuff and be like, no, my mom was on my team. She was also struggling. She was also trying to like figure this out, and the frustration from her perspective, where in the moment it doesn't feel that way. And so I'm wondering, because now you're a little bit removed from being a homeschool parent, and so, uh, you know, how do you view like your homeschool experience, and then what has happened in your relationship with your kids as far as like, you know, do you guys ever talk about it? Do you guys ever like do they come to you and be like, "Hey mom, like you screwed up here, but like we need to talk about it." Does anything like that happen?
yeah, and my son has said things. He's very funny, very that theatrical part of all those things, that growing up is part of his personality. I always kind of thought he might be a stand-up comedian because he's so funny. But I said, is there anything that I should have done differently he said, well, I didn't know what an assembly was. So I don't know. That's all the feedback he ever really gave me was he went to some comedy show and they were talking about class assemblies and he didn't know what that was. He had to have a friend explain it to him. But but I was like, well, we went to church. That's sort of
Right.
assembly.
It's just a gathering of people. That's all it is. Like,
Right.
yeah,
And we joke about those kind of things a lot, I think, as homeschool parents too. My kids, homeschool kids, when they'll go to events and somebody will, the community facilitator will say line up, and they don't know how to line themselves up. It's like, we do know how to get in the line. We've been to Disney before, or the grocery store,
right.
like, but line ourselves up is a different like skill that we don't know, but it's not like necessary for the rest of our lives either. So we like to like joke about those kinds of things, and there are things, but there are things that, as a parent, I can honestly look at and say, I wish I'd have done things differently. But it's not necessarily about the educational choices, although, like, knowing that I could have switched materials and changed things up, that, we go down a path and go, okay, maybe we shouldn't have pushed through all 100 of those lessons. Maybe we should have given that up before. But the before the internet was so, the information age, it was harder to find those kinds of supplemental resources and switch things up. So um, we've come a long way with that. So being able to switch those up is better. But but the thing that I still find very prevalent in the homeschool community is a lot of the parenting advice that's very authoritarian style parenting. And so while I could like look at education and kind of rethink how does learning really work, and how what is going to get us the best academic outcome, I never really like had enough tools and resources to really like rethink of how am I parenting. Like you said, your mother getting frustrated and you guys being at odds with each other, like understanding, you're you're having a hard time, you're not giving me a hard time. That it's not it's not that kind of a conflict. It's like trying to say, okay, what are you struggling with, what can I help you with, and trying to rethink parenting styles in that kind of way. The the tools that I didn't have at the time to self-regulate my own frustrations, that I would take that out on the kids and blow up. And the teaching at the time was that fear is an appropriate motivator to control their behavior, and what I'm doing is triggering their fight, flight, freeze, fawn responses instead of actually getting meaningful connection with this person I care about and I want in my life. And so, but I've read some books recently that, kind of help offer some different perspectives. And um, one is, let me see if I can find my notes.
Well, while you do that, I think I agree with everything that you're saying, because like I think even in my when I had my mom on the show and we were talking, one of the things that she consistently says to me, but she said on the show, was when I started homeschooling, I wasn't an emotionally healthy person. And that comes through in those early years. And so like for me, like even when I look at those first couple years, I just remember them as not being the most fun. We did fun stuff, but there just it wasn't it wasn't great. But my mom did work on herself a little bit. She worked on herself more after I was gone, after I had graduated. But she did get healthier as time went on, and so that parenting style of what you're talking about, it did shift a little bit while we were still at home, and so it is one of those things where it's like I can look back and I can go, okay, yeah, but like she has made some changes, and that's helpful. And even now, like she continually, like you were saying, like thinks about, oh, I should have done this differently. I could have done this differently. And I keep telling her, I'm like, Mom, at the time you did what you thought was best and what you knew how to do, and that's okay.
When we know better, we do
Yeah.
better. And so, but I see a lot of the parenting advice is still being recycled
Mm,
in the homeschool
right.
community, that same kind of authoritative. And I found a book recently, The Myth of Good Christian Parenting: How False Promises Betrayed a Generation of Evangelical Families, Breaking Cycles of Religious Trauma and Corporal Punishment. I definitely, if I had to do it all over again, I wouldn't spank my kids. I wouldn't be yelling at them and, you know,
Yeah.
punishing them in that same kind of way, and looking at it in a different kind of framework of, we're trying to be good stewards of these little human people that have been entrusted to us. And then another book that I found that was very helpful too was Good Inside: Becoming the Parent You Want to Be. It's a practical guide to resilient parenting and prioritizing connection over correction. And it was also very helpful for me because I lack some of those things with my parent, trying to express those things to my parent. So it was not wanting to try to figure out ways to offer, those meaningful connections to my kids, but yet also kind of reparenting myself because it's just not going to happen.
The beautiful thing about watching parents go through some of these things and make some of these changes, read these books, grow as people, is like, one, it also demonstrates to my generation that it's like it's never too late to grow. It's never too late to learn new things. It's never too late to evolve and change. Like that is okay. It's a green light to do those things. And like I'm a firm believer that like my dad is a better version of his dad, and I want to be a better version of my dad, and that just continually takes like growing and evolving as a human being. And so I never want to, I don't want to repeat the mistakes my dad made. Maybe I will, but like but I can learn from those things, but I can
You
also
get to make new
amplify.
ones.
I get to make new ones, yeah. but I can also amplify the good things that he did, right? And I can take those lessons and say, I'm gonna carry those forward. And so I applaud you for that. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to have you on the show and talk, was because, I think right now there's a lot of discussions happening from homeschool alumni. A lot of us are starting to speak up and talk about things. You and I both are fans of the Coalition for Responsible Home Education. They did a talk, as of recording this, we did a talk earlier this week with Stefan Merrill Block, who wrote Homeschooled. And so a lot of these things and that book has been very popular. But a lot of these conversations from homeschool alumni are starting to come to the surface of like how our experiences were, because now we have like 4 generations of homeschool alumni starting to speak up. And so I'm interested because one of the things that I continually hear is that like is homeschool parents getting kind of offended when we kind of share some of our criticisms, right? Of like, my mom could have done this better, or this curriculum really sucked, or, you know, and they take it as a personal attack on themselves. And so I'm interested, like, from your perspective, how you've handled that, because you don't seem to really take the criticism as like a personal attack. You take it more as like, okay, yeah. So how do we shape that going forward? So let's talk a little bit about that.
The vast majority of the parents that I talk to, their intent is to do what's best for their kids. And so, but understanding our intentions don't always play out the way that we had hoped. The impact is different. And so, understanding and listening to alumni of what worked, what didn't work, like we could learn from the mistakes of others, but I mean, we should be willing to learn from our own mistakes too. But sitting where I am, I can't go back and change what I did. But I can say, if I'd have known this, that my younger self would have wanted to know this. So who out there is like my younger self, that we can go this direction and change the direction of things. And so I think it's really important to listen to everybody's story. We have another book that I like to drop recommendations about books is Stories Behind Stances. It's about creating empathy from hearing the other perspective. And it's written by Chris Singleton, whose mother was killed in the Emmanuel Church shooting. And so he starts the first, he talks about how we're all politically divided and we're just shouting past each other. That if we start from, instead of this is the conclusion of where you stand on this issue, what if we start from your story of how did you get to this place and what you think this solution would resolve? We're probably a lot more closer than we really think we are. And his first story is about what he thinks about guns. He thinks guns should have regulations and be, and how that impacted his life matters and how he sees it. But his best friend grew up with hunting and memories of hunting with his grandparents and his uncles and it's all family bonding stuff. And so where he's coming from in his perspective on guns is very different. And so, but being able to like sit down and say, understand where you're coming from, here's where I'm coming from, what could we, create, a shared
Right.
value out of this going forward as, reasonable solutions to this. I think that same kind of conversation needs to happen on all sides of education. People that are adamantly, for public education. I mean, my husband's in public education, so yes, I think that public education should have, viable resources and financial support and funding to make it, a successful experience. But I also support homeschool rights and parents' choices when the school doesn't work and they're falling out of through the cracks in the system. Like there's just all sides of those conversations, and then bringing to the homeschool debate, parents wanting to do what's best for their kids and looking for those kinds of resources, and then kids that have graduated from it saying, but it would have been better had I had this and this and this as a resource. Like, we all want resources and opportunities for the doors to open at the end of this. So, it's understanding where people are coming from and listening to that without it being a personal attack because of they came up with a different solution to the problem than I did. Like it's not about that. I don't need to center myself in those conversations.
Yeah. No, I 100% agree. I think being able to hear like I view my homeschool experience as relatively positive. I don't like there's not of course there's things I would do differently and I would ask my mom to do differently, but a lot of it like there was not abuse, there was not neglect in a lot of ways. And so it's one of those things that I sit in a very kind of weird space because like for a long time I was like I'm very pro homeschool. Like I don't see a problem with it. Why do people take issue with this or whatever? And doing the show and starting to hear those stories like you're talking about and try to come at it from a perspective of like I'm just going to hear you out, you know, and I want to listen. And how did you get to your conclusion of your anti-homeschool or you're so pro homeschool, kind of a thing. It's helped me a lot to kind of view everything from like a wider angle, I think, where it's like, okay, yeah, but now to your point, let's work together to create common sense things that it's like these can be implemented. They don't infringe on your rights. You know, they also create safer environments for those who were neglected, who were abused, those types of things. And so, yeah, I think again, to your point, great opportunity right now to just start hearing stories and coming at it more from a perspective of like let's listen to each other before we jump to all of the conclusions. So
And I don't know if there's something about being American, that we are so fiercely independent. Don't tell me what to do. Don't tread on me. Or maybe there's more of neurodivergence, that that is that personal demand avoidance, persistent demand avoidance that, don't tell me what to do, it somehow triggers in these parent conversations that I have this authority. I don't want anybody coming into this space. There was a recent interview that I was listening to, Rachel Denhollander, and she's also a homeschool grad, and so I followed her for a while too and listened to what she had to say. And her abuse story is a very caring parent who was like, right there, and still abuse happened to her, and she didn't have the words and the terminology to say what was actually happening to her, and it triggered the whole Larry Nassar thing. But now looking at her homeschool experience and her experience as a parent, saying I don't have absolute authority as a parent. There are other spheres of authority that I answer to: God, the government, other in my society, my children. Like that, she's like raising these circles of accountability that we have that limit, you know, and you have to be willing to look at your parenting and say, I did the best I could, but it was the best I knew at the time, and my human limitations. It was probably not the best, that I could do. That had I done that differently, and so I don't know. It just feels like we're getting triggered unnecessarily, as if this bloated government is coming to take away our kids, and it triggers that sort of like defense mechanism in us that I don't think that's really the point of a lot of these conversations. I know, CRHE likes, says there should be some legislative measures, but honestly, a lot of what they do, that's what we're already doing in South Carolina. I don't feel like it's overly invasive recommendations, and so I don't hear it in the same kind of way that someone they that 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 we're going to lose our kids or whatever. It's more about am I an approachable, an askable parent? And like Rachel's little podcast interview that she did, she was talking about giving your kids the agency to come and like appeal to your parental decisions, that there are sometimes choices that you have to make, that your kids don't understand. Years ago, we found out that my neighbor had boyfriend that was being removed from the home that had been registered as a sex offender. But when you look up the chart, that's not where he was living. That's not where it says he was living. And so, like, we had to make rules and policies about the the connect contact that they had with our kids, and the kids didn't understand that at the time. And so, there are decisions that you have to make sometimes that are in your child's best interest that they don't really understand, but yet, give them that appeal to say, kind of like what Stefan was talking about. I want to go back to school.
Exactly. Yeah. Stefan's story is great because yeah, he basically had to go beg his mom practically to go back to high school and you know and appeal to her in a lot of ways. And I think that that is like something that a lot of us we want that ability, or we wanted that ability sometimes to feel like, hey, if I go ask my parent about this thing, I'm really struggling in this subject, I really feel like this would be better for me, this isn't working, that I was going to be heard. And some parents do a better job of doing that than others, of listening to that information and taking it in and making those changes. And so, and then to your point, there will always be decisions the parents have to make that is not going to make sense in the moment, but it will make sense down the line. And so, understanding. But I think that's where the balance of it comes in of like, as a kid, if you do feel like I have been heard and I have been understood and we've made changes, then when your parent does come down to saying, I'm drawing a line in the sand here, we're not doing this, I think sometimes it becomes easier as opposed to if my parent is exclusively always saying, this is the way it is, this is how it is going to be. Again, going back to that authoritarian kind of aspect, it becomes harder, right? And that's when I think we see a lot more pushback from kids of being like, they get out of the house and then they're like, they go do everything bad because they were never allowed to do anything bad, or they were never allowed to make mistakes or whatever.
And also, listening to the pioneers' stories, the ones who were threatened that they were going to go to jail, that they were going to lose their kids, the understanding why they have such strong perspectives on some of these things because of the experience that they came from trying to do what's best for their kids and yet being threatened that they could lose their kids. So,
Right.
understanding all of those, perspectives and where they're coming from, I think is just a helpful
Yes.
part of it, that we're not none of us are really like out there trying to say, I want to give the government more control over my life.
Yeah, most people know.
I would like the government to do all these things for me. No, nobody wants that. We're Americans.
Exactly. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I think it comes down a lot of times to the fact that it's like, with CRG specifically, it's one of those things where I'm like, but certain things are common sense that we should be implementing. And when you look at something I didn't realize for a very long time was that, there's 50 states. Each state has control over its education system, and each state has all of these different rules around how homeschooling is implemented and the checks and balances that come with that. I grew up in a state where literally my parents had 1 week. They had to file a piece of paper that said, we are choosing to homeschool our kid. That was it. They didn't have to submit test scores. We didn't have to go in for evaluations, nothing. And and then in other states, there's a little bit more requirements. There's a little bit more, there's standardized testing and those types of things. A lot of states, there's not those safeguards of like, if there is a sexual predator or sexual criminal in the house, that like they can't homeschool their kid. But that doesn't really seem to, for a lot of people, that's pretty common sense that you wouldn't want to keep kids around a sexual predator. And so things like that, it's like, there's some common sense things in there that it's just it is it's worth exploring. It's worth talking about and seeing where we can land on things to give. Again, we're talking about like resources. I know as a kid that I did do some standardized testing. That was my mom elected to do that, mostly to help her make sure we were in the right position grade wise, because her goal was always get to college. If they want to go to college, they're able to get to college, type of thing. And so it helped her determine we were at the right spaces. And so it's one of those things. But as a kid, it was so helpful because I actually felt like, oh, I'm smart, because I had this like tangible thing that it was like not just my parents always grading my stuff and letting me get A's or letting me rework things and get good grades. It was like, no, I got one opportunity to go in and take a test, and I know that I'm actually like a decently smart human being, or at least I'm average, or whatever. It helps give you a sense of agency over yourself to some degree. And so that's why I advocate for that, because I just know that for me personally, that would have been a huge benefit of just knowing that it's like, okay, like I'm actually like I'm smart. I'm smart enough. Um as smart as public school kids for sure. And so anyway.
Part of what we do in South Carolina with our record keeping is keeping some samples of their work,
Mhm.
and I talk a lot about why you want to do. Okay, yeah, the law says do this over here, but why? Do it in a purposeful way, so that the records are meaningful to you. And part of the is to be able to show your child, you know, this is where you were struggling, because we all naturally, the way we think, we hyper focus on what's not working, and so it's natural for our kids to do that too, to be able to show them, okay, you're struggling over here in this area, but look where you're working in this area. Like everybody has different kinds of smarts too, and so that's part of the reason why we put my daughter into gymnastics, because she was struggling with that reading and the academics. And so having her to have that area where she was like excelling, like it was a very valuable part for her too. But also being able to show, okay, so you're struggling, but look, you are making progress. Look, we're making and also to reassure myself of that too, that I wasn't screwing it up. But yeah, that's a lot of those kinds of things, and testing can be one measure to say you're making
Yeah.
progress. You're it's okay. This is not, a dead end road. The doors of opportunity will open for you at the
Yeah.
end. I think another thing that CRHE does, that aside from the legislation, they have created sort of like a tutorial for training DSS agents. So if you get reported for DSS, whatever they call it in the different states, social services, somebody comes and says they're not in school, they don't necessarily know what homeschool should look like. And so they've created sort of a intentional, this is what intentional parenting and education looks like guide, which I think is super helpful, because we don't have anybody out there advocating for that. And so them jumping into that and saying this is what it should look like is very important. And they're getting invited to conversations that I would never have been invited to talk to. And so it's kind of impressive to me to watch what they're able to conversations that they're able to um, initiate in places. Very helpful for us all. It's making it better for us all that
Yeah.
way.
Well, one of the great things that they do is that it's a consistent question as being asked of what would have been helpful, and let's build the resources around that. And so there's resources not only for current homeschool families, for those DSS agents like you're saying, but also like for homeschool alumni. And so, for things of like, if you do come from a home where there was educational neglect or abuse. Okay, so how do you get an education now as a full-fledged adult? Well, you've got big gaps, but like maybe you're actually a smart person. You just you weren't afforded education. Okay, here's how you can get access to that. In the same way, abuse, neglect, those types of things. Like, here's how to get access to therapy and to help those types of things. So they build resources around all these different things, and it always stems from that question of like, what resources would be helpful? Okay, now let's build those. And so I think that's a really powerful place to be in, because we're always looking for resources, and that's and so it's a good business to be in to some degree,
Right.
and it's a great service to offer to the community. So I do want to pivot just a little bit to what you're doing now, because you're still, even though you're not no longer homeschooling your kids, you are still involved in the homeschool community in South Carolina. And so talk me through a little bit about what you're doing, what you offer, and I know you've also got an event coming up here in June. So let's just go through it. How are you still involved in the homeschool community?
Well, I run an accountability association in South Carolina. They have, some specific um, rules of what your homeschool is supposed to include, and some record keeping you're supposed to do as a parent, and they want someone to verify that you're doing those basic things. And so that's what I do, is kind of run this accountability association that verifies that people are doing the minimums. requirements of the record keeping. But I spent a lot of time talking about why they want to do it. Like, don't just do it and check off boxes and say, yeah, yeah, yeah. I don't need you to create a bunch of like stuff that prove to me that you're making progress. I'm really more trying to come alongside them to say, do you feel like you're being successful? Where do you feel like you're struggling? Let's have real conversations about that and try to find you some resources to help where things aren't going well. And so having those kind of open, honest conversations just with a select group of people who chose me as their accountability. I also, while I was doing that, we had a legislation that came along to kind of eliminate all of our associations. They said, you know what, there was supposedly, I guess, a case where a child had been in DSS and died because of neglect or abuse or something. Nobody could ever really find the actual story, though, and really find out where they were registered, if they were were they just off the grid, like how does that work? And so it kind of burst my bubble, though, because I had been kind of like in this la la land that was like, yeah, homeschooling's legal, everything's fine. Like, I didn't realize that there were people that were out there saying, no, homeschooling's not a thing, you shouldn't do this, and waiting for abuse and neglect to be the reason that we're going to resolve this problem, sort of a reactive kind of thing. And so, it poked the bear and woke the giant for a while, and it caused a lot of outrage. But as I was looking at that, I'm like, but we could be more proactive about this and more intentional about showcasing what homeschooling is supposed to look like. We could also be more proactive in creating preventive factors, protective factors in our homeschool community. Do we actually know what abuse and neglect looks like? Do our neighbors know what abuse and neglect looks like before they go and report us to DSS? Like trying to just be like sort of that conversation of preventive resources. And so I found several things in South Carolina and, around, and that's where I first discovered the coalition as well. And started following a lot of these resources and trying to try to create a conversation here that is a resource hub, no matter which association you choose, getting accurate information. And, the more social media it goes, it's so much misinformation and disinformation out there. So it's like
Right.
screaming into the void sometimes, like, no, this is how.
Yeah, for sure. So you have, in addition to the bookkeeping stuff, you also have a blog, right, where you provide
Yes.
resources for people. And so let's shout that out really fast. What is that called?
It's called the South Carolina Homeschooling Connection. Homeschooling sc.org, I think is
Okay.
the URL.
I'll make sure it's linked down below as well. So,
But yeah, it's a resource hub. I have self-declared that I am the self-appointed busybody of homeschooling in South Carolina, and I collect resources and information that, inspire excellence and empower parents to do a good job in their child's education, whether they come in for a little bit or a long time, because a lot of people are coming for just a period of time now. So it's like a temporary stepping stone to get them through this hard period of time, and then they're going to put them into another school. There's so many, choices out there outside the traditional brick and mortar classrooms now that they have to figure out which one fits.
exactly. Yeah, there's like the options are endless. Um, and I recently chatted with somebody about what is the umbrella, what fits under the umbrella of homeschooling, because I'm like, there's now all these options that are like flexible school. And so, yeah, so what really is,
Right, that personalized kind of
yeah,
cafeteria style. I'll take a little of this. We'll do some dual enrollments. We'll do an online
exactly.
class. We'll do, some real life learning project based stuff and create our own, thing. And so,
Right, exactly.
so one of the resources that I have found along the way is we have here in South Carolina the Children's Trust. They're kind of a division of Prevent Abuse, Child Abuse America, and they have resources that talk about building protective factors of preventing abuse before it escalates. Like nobody starts out one day and says, I'm going to abuse my child today. Like it escalates from those kind of like frustrations and, could be external pressures of finances, and you just like dysregulate and take it out on your kids. And so
Exactly.
kind of understanding some of those, factors that contribute to how abuse happens, and understanding it in a way. We always talk about, but there's laws to catch abuse. And so we don't need to add them to the homeschool thing. But, we also have drunk driving laws, but if you saw a friend getting in the car about to drive drunk, you'd take the keys away from them. And so equipping us with those kind of tools to like really recognize a family that's in crisis when things are escalating. How do you have the tools and the equipment to step in and say, no, here's what we could do better, how we could do things differently, and kind of prevent that. They have this little story on their website with the Prevent Child Abuse, the Children's Trust, that there's a parable about a villager who finds a baby floating in the river. The villager jumps in and saves the baby. The next day, the villager finds 2 more babies in the river, and he brings the babies to the village and finds families to care for these other new babies. While the villagers are figuring out how to provide love and food and shelter for these 3 new babies, they find more babies in the river. And so while they're struggling to cope with these new responsibilities, somebody in the village decides they're going to hike upstream and determine how to get to the source of the problem. And so their attitude is prevention is the key. If we can stop these things from escalating, that we go upstream, we can change the story. Upstream is really where we say solve problems by helping families before the crisis of abuse and neglect occurs. And so that's part of the conversation that I like to bring in here, is that we can bring in lasting positive change for our, children. And that's part of what I do with the blog, is try to talk about those, protective factors kind of interwoven in there as well. That we're trying to do what's best for our kids, but like we talked about before, one of the things is like trying to expect more than what they're truly capable of doing, that we're frustrated. Why can't you get this? And the curriculum says you're supposed to have learned this skill by now. Why can't you get it? Get it if I yell it at you. I can just scream it into your mind, and then it'll come to you, and so like trying to understand real like age appropriate milestones of things, and then sort of the other side of it, expecting too much of our kids, that here you can handle all of this, you can do all this on your own and learn this, and kind of parentifying our kids in the opposite direction. But all of those things fit into this framework about understanding actual, protective factors. And so that nuance of the conversation, like it doesn't necessarily have to, I don't pretend like I have any sway in legislation preventing it or instigating it or anything. My sway is more on a one-on-one. How do we help each other and parent along the way and pull each other along and provide those kinds of resources? So
Yeah, no, and I think that's so important because, you really think about it and it's like, how does lasting change happen? Well, it happens in those one-on-one conversation. It happens in the small groups that then it grows and it continues on and it spreads, right? It's a ripple effect. And so I think that that's like so important. And I appreciate what your blog is doing, because I think we need more of these like types of hubs where it's like I can come get solid information. I can get not only resources, but access to things that I hadn't even thought about, like you were talking about with some of like the abuse and neglect, and recognizing those things. It's like, yeah, we have laws for that, but that's like outside of, that's not what we're talking about. This is homeschool stuff. It's like, yeah, but those do fit in the conversation to some aspect, right? And so those are important things to have in there as well. Anything else on the blog that you want to touch on?
yes, that we want to learn to recognize abuse recognize the signs of abuse. We talk about ACE factors. There's like a little 10 question quiz to kind of identify some adverse childhood experiences, and the lasting trauma and the impacts of those things on your long-term health, even physical health. It can affect things like diabetes and heart health and stuff like that too. But there's another side to it that I just recently found, that is positive childhood experiences, that the parent caregiver shows unconditional love, spending time with a best friend, volunteering and helping others, being active in a social group, having a mentor outside the family, having safe adults that you can go to besides just your parents. Even if your parents are already safe, you've got more beyond that is, valuable. Living in a clean and safe home with enough food, having opportunities to learn, having a hobby, being active in playing sports, having routines that are, fair, fair rules in the home. So those are some of those same kind of conversations that I feel like, we're all trying to have. We want our kids to come out of this childhood in a positive way and give them resilience, and
Yeah.
try to mitigate as much of our own trauma that we carried into parenting, and not pass it on to them. And so I always, want to talk about how do we implement some of those kind of trainings into our homeschool groups, and
Right.
can we do book clubs and circles with co-ops, and set policies in our manuals that this is how we handle kids, and this is how we handle disagreements, and they can get along. They don't walk away from here feeling bullied, and you know and building those kind of protective factors so that we can you know do better.
100%. Yeah. No, I think it's something that you mentioned in there too, that like it's so important, is like a lot of times homeschooling, regardless of how you do it, is to some degree an isolating experience. However, more and more you can get with co-ops, you can get with other parents, you can get with other homeschool families, even non-homeschool families, but you create some of those environments like you're talking about, where you give your child the access to other kids, you give mom and dad access to other parents, right? You get and those are very important things. We are not designed to live our lives inside of like a isolated bubble. We need other humans to do it. And so doing that, and then also, like you were saying, be able to implement some of those healthy routines, exchanges, the ability to look for those abuses, right? That understanding of like building those safe environments, that help happens in those small groups, and then it expands and grows and grows. And so again, I applaud you for what you're doing, because that's like huge. And I think so many parents, when I was even a kid, would have found so much value in something like that.
Right. We didn't have those conversations then.
Right.
But our entire culture is like pushing against the community. Like we're not we're the fiber of what makes us community. We're all it's a cultural thing that we're talking about in this time of what does community look like. And so it's all the more important for us to be trying to figure that out in the homeschool community too. How do we provide the kind of resources that help us thrive? So
Yeah.
yeah, one more thing that I do, homeschool law just talks about how to be exempt from compulsory attendance. So one of the services that I provide, because of my position, we get to go to the same workshops that the public school guidance counselors get to go to, and learn about sort of, transcripts and what goes on in the transcript, that kind of thing, and kind of being able to translate that. And years ago, 5, 10 years ago, the policies in my group, I didn't require us to do transcripts. The parents made the transcripts, and away they go. But more and more, in people that weren't necessarily going to college didn't need they didn't create a transcript. But now 5, 10 years down the road, they're like, oh, I do want to go to college. Now I need a transcript. And so we're trying to like backtrack and recreate, that course of study, that academic resume that will open the doors of opportunity for you. And so I do help people create those A lot of times it's the parent that's there that's helping. Sometimes it's just the grad. The parent is no longer around or able to assist, and so we can help kind of create that. I know there's other tools out there to kind of try to figure it out yourself, but I do offer that service as well. But another thing that I'm finding is that institutions don't know what to do with those parent-made transcripts, and so more and more they're looking for somebody else to validate and verify. Is this real? Is this course's study accurate? I get calls from job employment verifications. Did this person really graduate? Had state and federal, employment where some guy with a badge shows up and says, "This is who I am, and this is why I'm allowed to, verify this." And I'm like, "Here's my ID. Here's what," and sign
Yeah.
off that they are, allowed to get a job. And the colleges are going more towards wanting some sort of, transcript that shows that too, and they want it to come from somebody else, not just, from the parent anymore. So that is a service that I also do provide. Whether you live in South Carolina or not, my sister lives in Georgia, and I created transcripts for her kids. And so, trying to help offer that as a service if you didn't get a transcript or suddenly decide you need one. I do offer that as a service to help out.
Yeah, as someone who went, we hired a third party to help me with college prep, and that was like such a game changer because they did help with, I believe, the formatting of the transcripts, but then it helped me with like the college admissions stuff and things like that. But that transcript was very important because even though I was applying to a lot of schools that did accept homeschool students, there was still like they're like, we want to see XYZ. There was those requirements even back in, this was 2013, 14 when I was applying for colleges and stuff. So and so I'm sure, yeah, things have changed, I'm sure, in the last last 10 years since then. But to know that there are people out here who are helping people put together those transcripts, because again, even if you don't go to college, you might someday want to go to college, or you might need it for some kind of job down the line. And so knowing that it's like it's there, you have it, it's just another step in that like independence that is so helpful. So
It's a forever document.
yes.
And so, and like sometimes the parent had it somewhere. They don't know where it is now. Where did it get filed? I don't know. Or, they have a copy of it, but they need somebody to send it officially. There's like, they have Parchment and Aviance, those kind of, instead of fax machines now, it delivers the official, secure transmission of the documents. So yeah, having somebody who has that kind of ability to say, "Yep, this is official. Here it comes."
Again, I applaud you for all the services that you provide for homeschool kids, because I think kids, parents, like they need them, right? And especially coming from someone who you lived it, you went through it with your own kids, and so not only like you've learned from those experiences, but now and you can help other homeschool families like not only do better, but also make sure like all of paperwork is lined up, all of the you have the resources you need. Like that is a huge, huge get. It is no small task. So I applaud you. Thank you for what you do.
I try. So
Let's talk about, if we're done with the blog, let's talk about the event and what you guys are doing.
so I have a homeschool event. It's a local vendor fair. I kind of take some of the resources that I've collected on my blog, and it's like a real life manifestation. It's a blog come to life of wandering around and talking to some of the people that are really, great resources. A lot of local co-ops and, opportunities that are here.
I think the events like that are so helpful. I remember as a kid going to some, and it's an opportunity, learn stuff, get access to curriculum, all of the normal homeschool, you know, things that we need. And sometimes it's better to see it in person than it is like to just look at it online. So, being able to ask a vendor more questions about it than you're going to get on a website can be extremely helpful.
Right. And find out if this co-op feels like the right vibe and
Right.
and meet the people that are running the program and those kind of things. But we also are intentional about creating more diverse resources. Last year our theme was mirrors and windows, like expanding your bookshelf and your lived experience. Collecting information that reflects your own lived experience as a mirror, but also um, is a window into how other people live. That there's a lot of different ways to show up in the world, and get sort of a glimpse of how those things happen. But this year we're kind of building on that theme, and it's connect, expand, and thrive. So cultivating that kind of connections in the community. That's why my blog's called The Connection. You know, we're stronger together if we're connected with each other, respecting our differences, and but kind of being a collective together, where we can make meaningful connections, broaden our bookshelves, and thrive as a collective. So we also are very intentional about more secular, inclusive resources. You don't have to leave your faith at the door like a lot of those kind of like secular, you know, events are. But you also don't have to bring one. So it's all right. We have Bob Jones Press over here and
Right. It's a mix
Oak
of all of
Meadow.
it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Oak Meadow over here. There's a good mix and a vibe. And our Bob Jones representative that comes also is very good at special needs accommodations, and she can take you through and kind of show you some examples of how you can modify your curriculum. It works with any curriculum, but she knows examples out of what she has to provide. But so it's not just, oh, I don't want that materials, but there's people that you can talk to that can help you figure out how to get what you need out of it. And so, but it's for everyone. We have stuff that's high school and beyond, college prep people, and
Exactly. Exactly. So when is this event? Where is this event? And then where do we get tickets, or how do we find out more information about
okay.
it?
It's on my the other website I have is Cola City Homeschoolers, and it is the Cola City Homeschool Expo, and it is in Columbia. We call Columbia Cola for short, Cola
Okay.
City.
Yeah.
It's a local vibe. Some people call it Soda City sometimes too. The cola,
Yeah.
capitalizing on the cola. So, and so yeah, Cola City Homeschool Expo. It's in Columbia. We have a Jameel Shrine Center that is bigger than a gym. They actually bring in their shrine circus there, so it's how big the venue is. And then we're also partnering with a kid market, so kids that are entrepreneurs can come and sell their snacks and crafts and little goodies. And so,
Very cool. And when is it again?
oh, June 27th.
June 27th. All right. In Columbia, South Carolina, or Cola City, Soda
Yep.
City. Um,
Yep. And attendees will get like a digital grab bag that has a lot of freebies and discount codes and things that they can take home with them, plus a few workshops to help inspire and encourage them, because our venue doesn't really, it's not conducive to have breakout sessions at that venue. So
right.
we're gonna send them home with you to watch with a when you have coffee or a glass
Yeah,
of wine or whatever later
exactly. Love
on
that.
your own
Love that.
time. Yeah.
Love that. Very cool. Well, all of these things are going to be linked down in the description below. Like, if these are at all of interest to you, link down below. If you just want to like learn more, check them out. They're really cool resources. Even myself as a homeschool alumni, I found them really cool. Again, just as like an opportunity to like know about what's happening in the homeschool landscape, and what's out there. You know, call me weird, but that's, my whole life has become homeschool themed at this point. So, yeah. Kim, is there anything we have not touched on that we need to talk about?
Nope. I appreciate you having these conversations, the nuance of perspectives that what education should look like and what we have to, how do we get the good, the bad, and the ugly out there and talk about it all. So I appreciate that, because parents, I do believe, are looking for educational alternatives for what's best for their child. And so
Yeah.
we need homeschool advocates to be included in that, because all stories matter, so that we can figure out a solution together.
Awesome. Yes, thank you. And thank you for coming on. Thank you for sharing your story and being vulnerable with us. Thank you again for what you do. It's absolutely incredible. So, with that, to the audience, again, if you found anything useful from this episode, let me know. There's comment sections down below on Spotify, on YouTube. You can shoot me an email, exhsclub@gmail.com. All my socials and stuff are linked below. Everything that Kim and I talked about, if it was books or resources, I'm going to try to link those down below. If I missed anything, let me know. I'll make sure I get it to you. And yeah, with that, we'll see you next week. Peace.